Welcome into another edition of the CFF Sites preseason preview series. Today, we're looking at Independence. My name is Joe DeSalvo, and I am joined, as always, by my partner, Mike Bainbridge. And Mike, here we are, Independence. We've got Sunbelt SEC, 8 down, 3 to go, total of 11 shows here. This one should be short and sweet for all you guys out there watching, listening. We are going to cover the G5 and P5 Independent. So if you want to get to BYU and Notre Dame, just go ahead and fast forward through the first half of this show, because we're going to cover the G5 teams first. Mike, Independence 2, 4, 6, only 7 teams here. Not a ton. We'll probably not have a lot to talk about, but some few tidbits here or there that'll jump out on the page at some of these smaller programs, right?
Yeah, you don't want to talk about Connecticut for 30 minutes?
Well, our buddy and friend of the show, John Lobb, would be happy with that, but we'll see if we can
the one and only person that'd be happy with that.
So we'll see if we can do this show some justice. But yes, if you're here for BYU, Notre Dame, go ahead and get to the last part of the show. But Mike, we're going to start it with Army, right? One-dimensional offense. When it comes to college fantasy, it's usually very similar to Navy, right? Usually it's either quarterback, fullback. You got Tyler. You've got Jacoby Buchanan. He ran for 12 touchdowns last year, 500 yards, though. That's all he posted. Anything to look at maybe other than those two guys in any type of a deep full FBS format?
No, I don't think so. With the fullbacks, I was surprised, though. We initially in our projections, we had 3 fullbacks projected. It's kind of similar to how they finished last year. And one of those guys, Anthony Adkins, as we saw, was no longer on the Army roster. So now that's cut down to 2. So, maybe if somebody between Jacoby Buchanan and Tyson Riley, if one of those 2 maybe established himself as the guy at fullback, maybe that's somewhere we look at. Rare occasion where I think last year it was the slot back. In these triple options, that's never the guy, but they have an explosive option in Tyrell Robinson, who actually, I think, averaged the most fantasy points per game on Army last year. So, again, you're not drafting the slot backs just because they don't get that consistent volume that a fullback will. He might be a streaming piece potentially, but that's a extreme long shot.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's the part of just covering these names, right? They may not necessarily be draft day options, but there are some soft points in the schedule where if you keep an eye out, add some guys, such as him on your watch list, there might be a nice 1 or 2 week run for Army where you might be able to take advantage of the matchup and or have to do some type of a fill-in due to bye weeks and injuries on your roster.
Yep. So, I mean, similar to Navy, you're looking at the fullbacks or the quarterbacks. At quarterback, it's been, I think, 3 years now since they've had one guy make it through the entire season. They rotated 3 last year due to, injury or ineffective play. And then that time when it was just one quarterback, or Calvin Hopkins, I believe, he only finished as QB 55. So we need one guy to establish himself and to remain healthy for the entire year for him to have any relevancy.
Now let's hop over to New Mexico State, where they lose. First of all, they start off kind of a new regime, right? They bring in Jerry Kill as head coach. They bring in Tim Beck as offensive coordinator. They lose running back Jawan Price, who was brought over to Syracuse to provide some depth there behind Sean Tucker. They bring in Amani Watkins from TCU. They lose Isaiah Garcia Castaneda to Nebraska at receiver. They've got Jonah Johnson at quarterback. Do we know what to expect? Do we think we know what we're going to get out of this Tim Beck offense? Because for me, I think that's really the hesitation. We're familiar with the way New Mexico State has played over the past couple of years, and we may get a little bit curious, the system, change of pace, possibly. There's just some question marks around the New Mexico State offense, at least for me, going into the new season.
Yeah, definitely different. I mean, that's expected under Jerry Kill. New OC Timothy Beck, as you mentioned, he ran the ball around 60% of the time at Pittsburgh State at his last stop. So, and I think the top talents, or the most talented playmakers they have, might be at running back with Amani Watkins, TCU transfer, Jamoni Jones, which was I believe he might have started P5 and then he went the JUCO route, but he's coming in. I mean, Amore Samuels looks like he's relegated to RB3 at this point. So, but I think they should be able to run the ball somewhat effectively. Jonah Johnson, I know you mentioned him. He's no longer there. So I think it's going to be another JUCO in Diego Pavia. He seemed to be the guy coming out of the spring.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Thanks for correcting me on that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a dual threat. I think he rushed for around 600 plus yards in his last season at JUCO. And Beck does have a small history of running his quarterbacks. I think the last season at Pittsburgh State, he ran him 130 times or so. So if we get that out of Diego Pavia, their schedule is not brutal. The September is, I think they face Wisconsin, but outside of that, maybe he could be a streaming option. We like running quarterbacks, obviously. But yeah, I think this is a stay away in year one, but I think obviously with his track record, you'd agree that Jared Kill, good chance of him turning this around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's had some success in his history. Just, where we are right now to where we're going to be, we may be, it's just two different narratives right now. So let's go over to UConn, where a very similar situation, right? Replace head coach. They bring in Jim Mora. Mora brings in Nick Charlton over from Maine. Really not much popping up for me on the fantasy radar. Maybe a player like Keelan Marion at receiver. What about some other tidbits here for UConn, Mike? Anything that you can offer on Charlton and his days at Maine?
Yeah, I wrote it up in the guide. Just some quick stats here. Their pace average, they're about to run 67 plays a game. 52 52% run, 48% pass. So relatively even there, but a slight edge towards the run. Running back one, I think, is intriguing just because in past history they get around 36% of the volume. Not a bad total for one running back. And then kind of what I mentioned at receiver, Charlton's had some dudes at his previous stops. Wide receiver one averages are just under 15 points a game, which is not bad. And he's got some talented guys there with Keelan Marion, like you said. Cameron Ross. I think he led the team a couple of years ago as a freshman, had around 60 receptions or so. So there's talent at wide receiver. So that's kind of where my interest is at. The other spot that I wanted to mention was quarterback. They got Taquan Roberson, the Penn State transfer. He was thrust into action at Iowa last year, which is kind of a no-win situation against that defense on the road. But, dual threat guy, so he can move. I would say he's got to win the starting quarterback job this year because they brought in the high 3-star quarterback, Zion Turner. He played at St. Thomas Aquinas down in Florida, obviously one of the best high schools in the country. And he was sought after by Miami, Arkansas, LSU. They all offered him. So that's a guy I think I'd watch out for, maybe a late dynasty pick in the near future.
Now, as we move into the next program, we're going to get into UMass, right? Where now we start moving into more fantasy relevant programs, particularly Ellis Merriweather, the running back at UMass last year, carried the ball 200 plus times, 1,100 yards, had 5 touchdowns, even had 22 receptions out of the backfield, put together 5 straight 100-yard games, I think, to finish the year. But now we're looking at a new year, a new head coach. Don Brown brought in from Arizona. He was the defensive coordinator over there. They bring in Steve Kasula, the offensive analyst from Michigan, right? And so Merriweather's one of those names this year where, I think had things been the same, we might have him ranked a little bit higher than where he's at right now. But that just seems to be a little bit of a hesitation, at least for me, right? We know where they're, we know he can be a bell cow for their offense. The question is how does the system change, or, is it drastically going to change up? And will we get more of what we saw from Merriweather consistently through the year, or was last year's five-game run to end the year just a little bit of a hot streak, right? But Merriweather for sure on the draft radar this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's undoubtedly their best player. Just again, the spring and the coaching change kind of cause for concern for me. So I really haven't been targeting Ellis Merriweather too much. If I miss out on a UMass running back. So I'm not like terribly concerned about that. Despite how he finished last year, I think two things. One, the coaches spoke about they don't want to have it just be Ellis Merriweather, and they've added pieces in that backfield. Greg DeRozier's from Louisville is expected to be in the mix. Tim Baldwin, who I liked from Indiana, he's around. Kayron Adams, the former Rutgers transfer, he went from running back to linebacker and then back to running back. So they got three P5 transfers behind Ellis Merriweather. So I don't think he'll have to shoulder the load like he did a year ago. The second cause for concern was looking at Steve Kazula back at his time at Ferris State. He ran his quarterback a crap ton, right? 17 carries a game, I think, between a 2-year span. And projected starter looks to be Zamar Wise at this point, who is a runner. He's a former receiver. So he's got the ability to run. And I think just that, between that and then the added depth they have in the backfield, plus kind of coaching comments, I don't think we see that hot streak that Merriweather had at the end of the year continuing.
Well, a lot of that too comes down to, and this is where, whether or not depth is really going to play into a factor, but the scheduling comes in, will play a factor this year as well. And I do think UMass fares out a little bit better in regards to schedule. I mean, you've got matchups like Stony Brook, Temple, Eastern Michigan, Liberty in there, New Mexico State, Arkansas State. They do end at Texas A&M and Army, so the back end last couple of games. But for the most part, that schedule does look pretty good. And whether or not they ride Merriweather may just come down to how well and, how competitive they are in some of these games, right? And so that's sort of the trade-off, right? We don't know for sure what we're going to get out of the system, but if UMass can stay in these games and they happen to ride their best player, that could play into your benefit with Merriweather. But UMass has to stay competitive this year, or you might see some rotation through there.
Yeah, just one top 30 projected defense on their schedule. So that, like you said, that definitely works in their favor.
Now let's go over to Liberty, Mike, where Hugh Freeze has sort of recalibrated the offense. He brings in Dede Hunter, the running back from Hawaii. He adds Charlie Brewer after Brewer's sort of debacle over at Utah after leaving Baylor. He lands over at Liberty, our projected starter to begin the year. They bring in, and I think, CJ Yarborough's back in the mix at Liberty. They bring in Caleb Snead, who could be a sneaky good receiver that transferred in from Campbell, right? They have some options here at Liberty, but unlike last year where we had Malik Willis sitting as, one of the top probably 3 consensus picks for college fantasy to begin preseason, we really don't have any Liberty players ranked high this year. And we know that offense is probably going to put up some points, but it may be a little bit more spread around this year. Don't you agree?
Yeah, it sounds weird to not want to target players in a Hugh Freeze offense, but kind of nobody sticks out really here. Charlie Brewer, maybe a QB4 on your roster. I think the comparison is Stephen Calvert that first year prior to Malik Willis. He finished as QB 50, and he was a net negative basically on the ground. He had negative rushing yards and 0 touchdowns. Brewer is not going, I think we agree, he's not going to run as much as he did at Baylor. It's just with all of his concussion concerns, right. He's better off, preserving his long-term health and not running the ball. And I don't think they'll ask him to do that much because of the increased depth they have in that backfield. I think it's going to be a committee approach for the most part, again, between TJ Green and Day Hunter. Day had a good spring. And they do have 140 carries to play with now with Malik Willis. So maybe we see a guy emerge. And I kind of like at receiver too. I know we're kind of hitting them all here. I didn't even realize this until just kind of researching. Caleb Snead, who you mentioned, the transfer from Campbell, he played Liberty in week 1 last year, and they must have liked what he saw because he had 70 receiving yards and a touchdown. So we have Yarbrough as the projected wide receiver 1 for now, but I don't think you'd be surprised at all if that flip-flopped at some point.
Yep. No, not at all. So before we get into the Power 5 programs, before we touch on BYU and Notre Dame, let me just remind everyone that's watching and listening, we've got the preseason fantasy draft guide ready to rock and roll on the site. College fantasy football's #1 preseason resource. We've got you covered from preseason, draft season, player projections and rankings through the season. And of course, Mike's got all of the DFS write-ups. We've got you covered all the way through. So if you haven't yet come in and gotten a membership, right now is as good a time as any. We're coming up on 4th of July weekend, and it's a great time to really dive into your college fantasy football research and get ready for the 2022 season. So, Mike, let's start with BYU, right? Where, they do lose running back Tyler Algier. Big loss for them in that running game. They bring in Christopher Brooks from Cal to try to maybe make up for his loss. However, he can do that. That would be tough. They return of, Jaron Hall at quarterback. They do have a veteran receiving group coming back. Gunnar Romney, Puka Nakoa, Neil Powell. They got Isaac Rex back at tight end. So there are some weapons back for BYU this year. One thing I mentioned to you, and we talked a little bit about this in the preseason, the one thing that makes me a little nervous about BYU is they always seem to play one of the tougher schedules in the nation. That is a little bit of a concern for me, but a very veteran group returning for them other than Algier at running back, who they lost. What's kind of going on with drafts right now? What are we seeing? Where's the value at for BYU?
I don't know if there's necessarily value. I mean, everybody's kind of going where they should, right? Jaron Hall finished his QB 27 last year. We have him ranked in the QB 25 to 30 range. Unsure where exactly, but he's going right around that range, his ADP. So I like where he sits right now. I was debating if he had any upside because we like this offense, right? They're returning a lot of pieces, particularly at receiver. So all reports were coming out that he looked sharp, arm was strong during spring ball. But I was curious because he's an athlete, and I was wondering if maybe he had upside as a potential top 15 guy. Doesn't sound like that. If you kind of read the coaching quotes from Kalani Sitake, the head coach, he being Jaron Hall has had he dealt with injuries, I think, the 2 years prior to last year, and then he missed 3 games. So they don't want to put him in harm's way. So I think you don't get a lot of upside, but this is a guy that's going to put up consistent numbers for you.
Yeah, I'm just a little worried. I mentioned the schedule. So when you think of upside, you really sometimes have to get a break and get some of those cupcakes in there. And I'm not saying the schedule is a beast, but I'm just worried a little bit more about consistency. And I'm just going to run a little bit through that because in week 2, they do get Baylor, but they get them at home. But Baylor's defense is going to be pretty good. They go to Oregon the following week. So that's good. That's another strong program. Wyoming usually has at least a decent defense. And if Wyoming plays at their pace, you could be limited on certain possessions, right? And then after the matchup against Utah State, they get Notre Dame and Arkansas back-to-back. They go cross-country to Liberty. And really the one, late in the year, they go to Boise, and then they're off before ending against Utah Tech and at Stanford. So I just think that there are a few obstacles on the schedule that doesn't make it ideal, where I think you're going to be leaning on a player like Jaron Hall consistently on a week-to-week basis this year.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, where Jaron Hall's going, where Christopher Brooks is going, you don't have to spend an arm and a leg for these guys. So I think they're just all around, even the receivers, valuable contributors to your college fantasy roster.
Yeah, much like we were talking about Liberty, BYU, no players really jumping off the board as far as a must-have, and all of them are, they're going in the middle to late rounds of all the drafts. So, like you said, I mean, as far as value goes, nobody's reaching for BYU players, but at the same time, no one's not getting selected, right? And it just feels it feels about right with where they're going now.
Absolutely.
Notre Dame might present a few more questions. We're going to get into them, where Marcus Freeman's taken over as head coach. I think the big news for Notre Dame was Logan Diggs, the report of the shoulder injury in the spring. You and I had him pegged at running back 1 this year. That makes Chris Tyree a little bit more valuable, particularly at the beginning of the year, depending on how long Diggs is kind of held out. And those shoulder injuries, and we talked about this as we were going through our projections, can be a little tricky. I mean, you could be, you could be looking at a month difference between his return time and when he gets back. You've got Tyler Buckner, who we've got projected at quarterback as the starter there at quarterback. That proved very valuable running the ball last year. We know he's got some dual threat ability, but only 35 pass attempts last year, Mike. 3 picks, 3 touchdown passes. At receiver, you've got Lorenzo Styles, Michael Mayer. Those are probably the 2 top options right now. Mayer, for us, the tight end 1, the overall tight end 1. And for me, and I'm just going to throw this out there, we could talk about Notre Dame up and down. I think Lorenzo Styles might be a guy that we could be undervaluing a little bit right now in drafts with where he's going. Remember, Kevin Austin caught 48 passes, over 850 yards and 7 touchdowns last year. And it feels if Lorenzo Styles fills that gap, he might be going a little lower than where I think I might have him projected. So kind of give us your thoughts on Notre Dame and the players and your thoughts at the running back position. And, if you want to add something on receivers or Buckner, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, Lorenzo Styles is kind of interesting to me because I've gotten that impression too in our drafts, is that he's falling quite a bit. And he showed out the last time we saw him with 100 yards and a touchdown in that bowl game where, I mean, I know it just, I think we entered that Notre Dame Oklahoma State game thinking it was going to be a lower scoring affair. And then, Jack Cohn decides he wants to throw for 400 yards. So that one kind of went off the rails a little bit, but it's a good lasting impression. My thing there is you didn't hear these these reports coming out of spring that he was just dominating, right? You didn't hear any of that. And I participated in, numerous best balls with a few Notre Dame fans, and I don't see them jumping up to grab Lorenzo Styles. And so I'm kind of, observing what those Notre Dame fans are doing. So I don't know. I think you can get them at a decent rate. And like you said, they've produced wide receiver 1s at a decent clip, the last 5 or 6 years at Notre Dame. So he's interesting. I think the running back position's also interesting from the standpoint of how they use Chris Tyree. Exceptional pass catcher, like we've seen in the past. So I think he'll get the start in week 1. But don't be surprised to see somebody like Audric Esteem. I practiced that one for a few times before this, and I probably still butchered it. But he's a guy that I know a few people like that could see some work in the backfield early in the Notre Dame schedule with Logan Diggs out. I think they're going to try and use 21 personnel where they're going to use Tyree in the slot. So if Diggs is out, maybe Esteem get some work in the backfield and Tyree in the slot there to kind of make up for some of the lack of personnel at wide receiver. And then one quick update, friend of the site, Greg Brandt of Debbie Watch, posted in the Notre Dame channel on Discord that it's expected that Logan Diggs will be back, I believe, in September. They said that first quarter of the season he should be back. I think he's on schedule for that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because when we did the projections, we were just getting the news, and based on the injury that we had done in our own homework, it's one of those injuries where, best case scenario, he's back for the season opener, but is he really game ready? Worst case scenario, 3-4 games into the season, and then you target that October 1st bye date and have him ready to go for the back half of the schedule. But that was tricky when we were projecting out Chris Tyree, because we spoke about this a lot in the spring and while we bumped up Tyree, because we're just going to assume that Diggs might be shelved for the first 2, maybe 4 games. And if you get a guy like Tyree that comes in there, and now they open up that first game at Ohio State, but to get Marshall, Cal, and North Carolina after that, if Chris Tyree comes in there and has, puts together 2, 3, 4 good, really games, it might be tough to keep him out of that running back 1 spot for a little bit of time. And so that's why we side with Tyree in the rankings. Is he just really has the pole position right now to start the year as that running back 1. And if he starts strong, maybe he sticks around in that top spot for a while, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think his size is that much different than Kyron Williams from last year. I'm just not sure that he's a kind of a workhorse type back. I don't think he'll ever be that.
Well, we've got to worry about injury concerns with him too, right? I mean, he didn't stay healthy last year either. So,
and now they lost to Jadarian Price, the freshman, for the year. So yeah, I mean, they're going to want to be careful with Tyree for sure now.
Yep. Well, that's it, Mike. Look, that's going to put a bow on the Independents, man. Short and sweet. We've got 2 more shows left. We've got Sunbelt. We've got SEC. We're going to wrap this show up. We've got 2 to do. Chances are we're going to get to the Sun Belt before 4th of July weekend, and chances are we'll come back from the holiday weekend, record our SEC show, and get that published, get everyone ready. The draft start getting hot and heavy over at Fantrax after the 4th of July. So that's going to do it for the CFF Site's preseason preview series of the Independents. For Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo with the CFF Site, and we're going to see you guys when we're talking Sun Belt on the next show. See ya.